I'm John Colgrove, and the founder and CTO at Pure. And I guess I'm supposed to be doing a fireside chat, so you guys can just ask questions and I'll answer them. Yeah, so while you are thinking of a question, I will point out, by the way, one other thing related to our earlier discussion about if you pulled the drive out and like waited an hour or whatever. As soon as the system actually finishes evacuating all of the data on that drive, rebuilding it elsewhere, it then actually goes and updates its membership of the system and kicks the drive out and rekeys the security key on all the drives. That means it sort of means you can't like stroll through the data center and steal a security key and stroll through another time and steal another security key, because every time the membership of the array changes, it rekeys. And so that does mean if you kept it out for an hour.
Okay, so it was out long enough to rebuild, then it would come back as foreign.
Well, then it'll come back and it'll just say, oh, new drive I didn't know about, and add it.
Right.
So
you are going on this way of all hardware design and stuff, but actually most of your competitors are going the opposite way. So when you decided to do this, why actually? Because keeping pace with all the innovation and the pure commodity hardware is not that easy today.
So it's not the easiest thing in the world. There's a couple of ways to look at it, and one thing I could say, and it kind of downplays some of what we've done in the hardware a bit, is kind of our goal was to say, look, we're buying a standard server. And why does somebody like Facebook want to go and do an open compute standard? Because they say, hey, if I go to HP or to Dell or to whoever and buy a server, I get all the stuff I don't really want in it. And it's not, it doesn't meet exactly what I have. And we're kind of the same way. We were buying standard servers. They would have things we didn't need in them. There were other things we wanted that weren't there, so we're kind of having to make a compromise. And of course, we're also then paying a profit margin to that person. And so we said if we could build a standard server and if we could go, this we're building with Foxconn. I mean, is Foxconn sort of less of a commodity server builder than a Dell or an HP or something? I mean, they're the same. And so we can, the goal is to get kind of what we want in the form factor that's best for us. And we've talked before about how simple it is to upgrade from a 300 series to a 400 or from a 420 to a 450. But if my 11-year-old was still 7, he could replace that controller. He could go and upgrade an M20 to an M50 or an M20 to an M25, whatever comes next, pretty easily, right? I mean, if I were doing the demo, I wouldn't have had one of our guys. I would have had one of you just come up and swap all the parts, right? If the goal is to get something where every part...
Some of your people don't trust us with good reason.
So my goal is that a kindergartner should be able to do that without a manual, without instructions. And, it's like, slide this out. Slide in a new one.
If that's the case, why do you guys almost mandate that your own SEs do the installs instead of partners?
That's a very good question. So, we started out and we wanted our own SEs to do all the stuff because it was another touch point with the customers. We wanted to build relationships with them. And, it's a very positive touch point with the customers. And so we've actually kept that longer than we had planned. But you definitely want to just say, okay, look, it's simple enough. You guys can do it. And so there again, if we can get the process to be so simple that it's faster for the customer to say upgrade from one generation to the next than it is for them to pick up their phone and call their SE and schedule a time for the SE to come in and like go sign the SE in the lobby, then we've created a nice simple process. And that's what you want to do with it. You want to have everything be that simple. But even when it is that simple, it's still a good touch point with the customers, a good chance for the SEs to build their relationship and to have a nice conversation with the customer. And so you kind of like that, so that's why you get a balance. It's no different than, when you take a limo somewhere and the guy gets out and opens the car door, like you couldn't open the door. You had to sit there and wait for him to come around and open the door, but it's sort of considered good service. It's like, I always open the door. But, so that's kind of the thing. But we want to get it to where it's all self-service and it's all so easy that everything is just done by the customers.
A lot of the competition coming out nowadays are more scale out than scale up. I guess I classify you more as scale up than scale out. Why did you go down this path in the first place? I guess because it looks more like what normal storage looks like. Is that?
No. So we actually evolved to it. So actually, our very first office was immediately below this room. We don't have that anymore. And in fact, there was a conference room right about below where you were actually sitting, where the very first drawings of the product were put on a whiteboard. And they looked a lot like some of the scale-out designs that you see. And then we realized that the cost of all the extra CPUs and memory and chassis was going to be somewhat prohibitive and a bit of a waste for the customers. So it was going to slow our entry into the market. It was going to be more expensive for the customers. And it also added complexity, and by adding complexity and more parts adds more failures and thus lowers reliability. And it wasn't so it wasn't something that we wanted to do. And so we started with the two controller design, and when we find that the two controller design no longer meets the needs of the customers in the market, we'll happily go and change that.
I remember you guys talking about scale out downstairs in that office the first time we were here.
You may also remember, you were actually never in the one downstairs. You were in the one immediately above us.
Okay.
The first time you came, you were in the one immediately above us. Trust me, nobody could have fit when we were in that office. We were so cramped at the end that if you were walking down an aisle between the desks, you had to zig and zag around the chairs. We had to make sure the desks were offset so the chairs weren't back to back. So no, we never had you guys down there. Would have been very cozy. But, if you, think about some of the other things that we talked about the very first time you came, the very next thing we do is going to be fully active-active, fully symmetric active-active. It's like the marketplace has made it clear to us that they don't actually generally want that, because most customers, as soon as they deploy the box, if it lost half its performance when a controller failed, they then don't ever want to use more than half the performance. So the next thing they ask is a feature, don't let me use more than half. So
we actually had a Twitter conversation today about active-active and active-passive, and I'm fine with active-passive.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest argument with a lot of the scale-out designs, if you build a scale-out that is sort of n+2 redundant, and I don't mean erasure-coded type n+2 redundant. Replication. You can argue that you can start getting better reliability from it. But when you take like a scale out of here's HA pairs, and if I lose both nodes of an HA, I just took my whatever my failure rate was for an HA pair, and I say, I have a cluster of 4 of them. Now my cluster fails 4 times as much. And when it's down, I've lost access to 4 times the data. And so, we didn't want to do a scale out more like that. And, so far the market hasn't required it. Most customers, if we go and ask a customer for the kind of data that you're putting on these arrays, how big do you want your array? They don't want a petabyte array. They say 200 terabytes, 300 terabytes. They might say half a petabyte. It's the biggest they would go, because they want to have fault isolation. What they're doing now is they're building all these pods, and they say, here's my pod. I want my pod to be simple and straightforward, and I want that pod to be resilient, and I want to then have a bunch of pods because I can manage them easily, and when one pod goes down, I haven't had too much of a disruption. And if they continue to build that way, then why should we put in a lot of work and changes to try to build for these ultra gigantic arrays and things like that.
Yeah. Frankly, I think the fact that you were a dual controller modular system made it easier for you in sales in the early end.
Yeah.
That it was just easier for people to understand.
Yeah. No, if we had come out with something like, hey, the smallest system is 10 nodes, that's an 8+2 RAID across the 10 nodes. It's like you start adding up the cost of the flash, the cost of the chassis, the cost of the processors, and the DRAM and I/O cards, and all of a sudden it's like our smallest system is $500,000, and who wants to buy, storage is conservative. Who wants to buy a $500,000 product from a brand new company? And so that's kind of how we drifted off of that, and
You find most of your success is in specific verticals, or is it more of a horizontal play? Or
no, it's been pretty broad. Early on, I was very pleasantly surprised by some of the smaller customers, because when you do a new technology, you expect the sort of big banks and tech companies.
I don't
they'll
think
buy
there's
one.
ever been a technology product Citibank didn't buy one of.
Yeah, but like one of my favorite customers was the city of Davenport, Iowa. They were an early customer. You can actually go look up. They had city council minutes where they discussed the purchase, like in 2012, and they've been a great customer. And when you can sell to somebody like that, it kind of bugs me. I live in Los Altos. The Palo Alto School District bought a pure array, but Los Altos School District hasn't bought one yet. So my kids have to suffer on disk-based storage. But we have a bunch of high schools and school districts that have bought. It's nice to see customers like that, or some of the Midwest manufacturers that are very conservative. Because it says how broad the appeal is. And so now there's been no particular vertical. We clearly have some verticals that are bigger than others and such, but we have a lot of different verticals and a good distribution.
What's the word on secure multi-tenancy? Because I know that's been asked about a lot from the service providers, or even the in-house private cloud solutions.
So there it comes down to a lot of a discussion with them about exactly what they mean, what they want. Because when you start talking about deduplicating the data across the whole thing, or the way in which as we write, we pack all the data that arrives temporally, in essence, together into RAID segments, then you start getting into this thing where what does it actually mean for the secure multi-tenancy? And then you start talking about fault isolation. Oh, I want this group to have their little mini array and this other group can't affect them. Well, if it's a data reducing array and this other group decides to write all of a sudden uncompressible, undedupable data and bloat their space, that's going to kind of affect other people in the array. So, we've talked to a number of those people, and they all have slightly different definitions of exactly what they mean. And so, as we add, we are adding features to address some of their concerns, but we try and do it relatively slowly, so that we don't want to add complexity. We don't want to add things to the array that we will regret later, and our customers will regret, because our customers like the simplicity of the product. And so it's always a balance. We had our second half sales kickoff back in August, and we had one of our larger customers, he spoke to us at that, and he basically, one of the comments was, hey, all my storage admins, they keep talking to your SE, and they keep asking for all these feature requests. They have this feature and this feature and this feature. Don't do any of it. I don't want the complexity. And that's what happens. Everybody you go to, every customer, they want one little dial, one new piece of information, one little feature. And the problem is they all want a different one. And so if you give in to 100 of them, all of a sudden you have 100 little dials and knobs and features.
Well, and you end up with a
camel.
camel.
Your simplicity.
It's a horse designed by committee.
Yeah. No, we aspire to be extremely simple and easy to use. I mean, I don't know, did Brian show you when he was demonstrating Pure One that like, oh, here, you can do it on your phone? We had our customer advisory board up in San Francisco. Oddly enough, it was the week, I guess it was the week before our IPO. And so I had to miss it. But I had all the guys that were there talk to me about it, tell me what went on. And one of our big customers, he's just like, oh yeah, we're migrating data onto you. And he whips out his phone and he like checks the status of all his arrays. And he loves that. And he can't do that with his other enterprise products. It just doesn't happen. And think about all the things that consumer technology has made so convenient for you. And I think one of the things you're seeing, and not just us, but in a number of the other startups that are trying to disrupt the enterprises, we're trying to bring some of that consumer convenience and consumer flexibility and experience into the enterprise.
Do you have customers asking for file services on top of the array?
We've had a few. I don't know the exact number, but we've had some.